Pace is Chicago's suburban bus network serving areas north, south, and west of the city. Today, I'm going to talk about Pace's top 10 weirdest routes, and let me tell you, they get weird. Similar to the video I made talking about the top 10 weirdest CTA routes, I'm not going to have any set-in-stone criteria. I'm looking for any routes that exist or operate in a way that is crazy or unexpected. Though, if multiple routes are weird in a very similar way, I'll place them all as one route and then I'll talk about them individually as necessary. Just because a route is on this list does not mean it's a bad route. All of these routes serve a purpose and are important to the Pace network. I will, however, say that some of these routes are not that great and do serve their purpose quite badly. But anyways, I think it's time to get started. Route number 10 is the 367. The 367 runs every hour Monday through Saturday from the University Park Metro Station to Park Forest. What makes this route weird is the number of possible routes this route could take to get from University Park to Park Forest. While it is normal for Pace routes to have some trips that take a slightly different routing from others, it is not normal for routes to have this many. The 367 has 8 possible routings. The primary route starts at the Metro, runs through Governor State University, heads down to Olmsted Lane, then heads back up Western to Park Forest. Now for the alternative routings. A trips bypass Governor State University, but otherwise run the route normally. B trips are identical to A trips, except they do serve Governor State University on request. Since B trips are either going to have the same route as A trips or regular trips, I don't count them as their own thing. Anyway, C trips head straight east on University Highway and turn north on Western, skipping the entire diversion south. D trips make a shorter diversion south, only going to Hickok as opposed to Olmsted. E trips take the same routing as C trips, except they bypass Governor State University. T trips are identical to normal trips, except they go off route slightly to serve the Thornwood House, which is pretty much an apartment building in the middle of nowhere. There are also combined D and T trips, which serve the Thornwood House but otherwise take the D trips routing. Finally, on Saturdays the route only runs from Park Forest to the Thornwood House and doesn't serve the Metro or University. In total, this adds up to 8 different possible routings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And like any other Pace route, the only way to know which route a particular bus is going to take is to either look at the schedule or ask the driver. A lot of these extra routings make the whole route more confusing and they don't really provide any more coverage, so I would streamline the route and only have 1 or 2 variations. Route number 9 is the 626, Skokie Valley Express. The 626 starts at Tower and Overlook in the Lincolnshire Corporate Center. It then heads south through Lincolnshire and Buffalo Grove, serving offices and warehouses until arriving at about Milwaukee and Lake Cook Road. The route then heads east on Lake Cook Road until Skokie Boulevard, diverging slightly a few times to serve office complexes and malls. At Skokie Boulevard, the bus heads south and gets on the Edens Expressway at Dundee, where it runs express to Dempster-Skokie Yellow Line and terminates. The 626 runs during rush hour only and takes this route in the peak direction, which is northbound in the morning and southbound in the evening. In the off-peak direction, the route runs express from Dempster-Skokie Yellow Line all the way to Buffalo Grove Metro Station, where it terminates. This route exists primarily to connect the large amount of office development in Buffalo Grove and along Lake Cook Road to the CTAL system. Beyond the I-90 Express routes, which serve Schaumburg, the 626 is the only Pace route designed specifically to serve suburban office development. Though, there used to be quite a few others, such as the 610, 616, or 620, but after COVID, they were all eliminated. The off-peak routing is also quite odd. My guess is that Pace realized there is a little bit of demand for service between Buffalo Grove and Skokie, and that if 626 buses are already going back to Buffalo Grove or Skokie to restart their primary route, they might as well run in service. Now route number 8 is the 223. The 223 is a proper combination of 2 different routes. It's not like the 367 where some trips take a slightly different route. These 2 routings are substantially different and are advertised as such. The route starts at Rosemont Blue Line and heads northwest along Higgins, Lee, and Toohey until arriving at Toohey and Elmhurst. At Toohey and Elmhurst, the route splits into what are referred to as the east and west routes. The east route turns south on Elmhurst and heads to Devon, where it turns west and ends at Tower and Mark. Eastbound buses head up Bussey. Yes, as far as I know, it is in fact pronounced Bussey. Not Bussey or anything like that, Bussey. But anyways, the route turns east on Toohey, continuing back to Toohey and Elmhurst, before ultimately continuing to Rosemont Blue Line. Now, the west route turns north at Toohey and Elmhurst, heading up Elmhurst until Oakton, where it goes west until Bussey, then turns south and continues until Tower and Mark, where it also ends. On the return journey, the route heads west to Lively Boulevard, where it turns north and heads back to Oakton, which it takes east to Higgins and continues back to Toohey and Elmhurst. The route then recombines with the east route back to Rosemont Blue Line. So when I said the 223 was a combination of 2 routes, that was actually a lie. In reality, it's a combination of 3 routes, because on Sundays, the 223 takes 1 different route. This route is sort of a combination of the 2 east and west routes, with westbound buses taking the west route and eastbound buses taking the east route. Another somewhat weird thing about this route is the schedule. The bus runs every 10 to 15 minutes during rush hour and every hour midday and late evenings, which is pretty normal. But on Saturdays, there's a big gap in the route's otherwise half-hourly service, with no buses between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. on either the east or west route. The 223's primary purpose is to serve a large number of warehouses in Elk Grove Village, just west of O'Hare. Because these warehouses serve goods from freight rail, there are a huge number of railroad crossings along the 223's route, and buses often get significantly delayed waiting for a train to pass. There isn't really a clear reason as to why the 223's east and west routes use the same number. The YouTuber Trains Are Awesome actually asked Pace why this was the case, and the response was, well, we don't actually know. We just inherited the route from a previous operator. A good portion of Pace's routes actually weren't designed by the agency itself. They were inherited from a variety of local suburban operators when Pace was created in 1983. The 223 is one of these routes, and has kept this east and west route operation since its consolidation into Pace. Really, the east and west route should properly be split up into two separate routes with two separate numbers. One of the routes would run Monday through Saturday, and the current Sunday route would just be the Sunday route of the other route. Now for route number 7. Route number 7 is the 332. The 332 starts at Rosemont Blue Line and then heads west along the south side of O'Hare, serving the airport's cargo facilities. The route then heads west to York, where it turns south and continues all the way to 22nd, turns west, and ultimately ends at the Oakbrook Center. In serving the cargo section of O'Hare, the route comes and leaves along Irving Park Road, but diverges off of it, once to serve the USPS facility, and again to serve all these cargo facilities. The order in which the route serves each facility can vary, however. A few runs make an additional diversion to the FedEx cargo facility, and sometimes they make this diversion before serving the other cargo facilities, and sometimes after. Additionally, some westbound buses skip the first diversion entirely. And to be clear, the second diversion goes under a runway and properly into the airport. The Blue Line also does the same thing when serving the airport's passenger terminals, but on the 332 you go right up along the runway, being separated only by a regular metal fence. The weirdest part of this route is its schedule. While the route runs 7 days a week from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m., the section along York only runs weekdays from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., with the route going only from Rosemont Blue Line to the cargo facilities at all of their times. While the route generally runs every hour, there are occasional 3-hour or so gaps in service in the late morning and evenings. While these gaps may coincide with the lack of shift changes at cargo facilities, it messes up service on York itself. A solid service on York should really be prioritized, with some buses skipping the cargo stops rather than adding service on York as an afterthought to a route serving the cargo facilities, as was clearly done with the 332. Route number 6 is the 542. The 542 is one of the 6 local Elgin routes, and just by looking at the map, you can tell they're all a little bit odd. The 542, though, is certainly the weirdest of the bunch. The route starts at the Elgin Transportation Center and heads south primarily along Grove and Raymond until arriving at Raymond and Bluff City, at which point the route turns east and heads to Liberty, where it makes a loop going back south and heading up a portion of Liberty twice, ultimately going to Villa. The route then takes Villa and National to Grove, where it then heads back to the Elgin Transportation Center. At that weird loop on the east side of the route, a few runs in the morning and evening will take half the loop and head down to Elgin High School. Those trips will then return straight up Villa and Highland back to Elgin Transportation Center. The weirdest part of this route is certainly the extra loop that it makes, which is really inefficient. If serving areas along that loop is really that important, the route should start at the bottom of the loop, then come back around to the top to avoid doing part of the route twice. I also question how sensible the routing to Elgin High School is. Students from most of Elgin have to deal with the 542 circuitous routing before getting to school. So unless a high percentage of students at Elgin High live along the 542's normal route, service to the school should be provided by a separate route with a separate number, and run directly from Elgin Transportation Center to the high school. Number 5 is the 570. The 570 starts in Fox Lake and heads east along Rollins Road until Cedar Lake, where it heads south and continues to the Round Lake Metro Station. The route then parallels the Milwaukee District North line before ultimately turning back north a little bit and ending at the College of Lake County. Now this seems like a pretty normal route that just goes from one place to another. However, the 570's Saturday's routing is where it gets weird. On Saturday mornings only, westbound buses head straight west on Washington from the College of Lake County to Haynesville, where they then turn north and head to Rollins Road and then continue west to Fairfield. Eastbound buses take the regular weekday routing from Fairfield and Rollins back to the College of Lake County. At about 1:30, however, this entire loop is reversed, with eastbound buses taking the Saturday routing and westbound buses taking the regular routing. In addition to all this, the Saturday-only section of the route, which is 5 miles long, only has 3 stops: here, here, and here. The rest of this section runs express. While the 570 is one of those pace routes where you can flag down the bus at any intersection, even if there isn't a stop, it won't do that on the express portion between Rollins and Haynesville and Washington and Atkinson. I don't have proper confirmation as to why the route makes this loop, but looking at it, I think it's sort of a peak direction route meant to serve the College of Lake County. Pace must have determined that on Saturdays only, most people were going eastbound in the morning and westbound in the evening, and decided that in the direction where very few people are going, the route should get back as quick as possible rather than taking its normal routing. This also aligns with the fact that the express routing cuts the total trip time by a third. Route number 4 is the 410. The 410 is one of the 3 pace routes that is contracted by the Village of Niles, with the other 2 being the 411 and 412. To start off, the route looks like this. While it is normal for pace routes to be rather wiggly, it's not normal for them to be this wiggly. Additionally, the wiggliness is far from the only weird thing about this route. First of all, the route is free. Being sponsored by the Village of Niles, the Village can and did decide that the route would be free, so it is. The weirdest part, however, is the schedule. While the Niles routes run 7 days a week, they only run between the rush hours, so from about 9:45 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'm not totally sure why these routes don't run during rush hour. I think they're primarily designed for people running errands like getting groceries or going to the bank, rather than people going to work at 9-to-5 jobs. But I can still for sure say that there would be demand for these routes during rush hour. This, along with their circuitous routing, are likely contributors to the route's quite low ridership of only 146 boardings per day. Route number 3 is the 811. The 811, called the Rosemont Entertainment Circulator, circulates around entertainment venues in Rosemont, as one would expect. The route starts at the Rosemont Blue Line station and heads south on River Road until Bryn Mawr, where it goes west until Park Place before heading south and then making a little loop and continuing back south on Park Place until Balmoral. At Balmoral, the route heads back east to River Road and continues back to Rosemont Blue Line. When there are games happening, the route also serves Impact Field. The town of Rosemont has a significant entertainment district with lots of hotels, restaurants, and a movie theater. The 811 exists to connect this district to the Blue Line. The route runs 7 days a week every 10 to 15 minutes, from sometime in the morning to sometime between 9:30 p.m. and 3 a.m., depending upon the day of the week. The weirdest parts of this route are the routing and hours. The double loop thing is pretty weird, the bus runs really late, and the Friday schedule is different from the schedule for every other weekday. The hours do make sense for a route serving an entertainment district though. This is just unique because the 811 is the only PACE route that exists exclusively to serve an entertainment district. Now route number 2 is the 755. The 755 is one of the 4 PACE routes that run express from downtown to Plainfield or Bolingbrook along I-55. Unlike the other I-55 express routes which serve the downtown core and the Magnificent Mile, the 755 mostly serves areas west of downtown. The route starts at the Plainfield Park and Ride, then gets on I-55 and runs until Highway 53, where it briefly gets off to serve the old Chicago Park and Ride before getting back on the interstate which it takes to Damon. The bus then heads north on Damon to Harrison, where it turns east and ultimately continues to Union Station. The 755 has limited stops in Chicago, with buses only stopping at the Damon Pink Line, a few places within the Illinois Medical District, a few places near the University of Illinois Chicago, and of course, Union Station itself. Similar to the other I-55 express buses, you can't make local trips within downtown on the 755. You can't get on inbound buses inside Chicago, and if you get on an outbound bus, you have to take it into the suburbs. I mean, I'm sure you can beg and the driver would let you off, but I wouldn't rely on that for my daily commute. The 755 is also a peak direction all-day route. From 5 a.m. to 11 a.m., the route only runs to Chicago, and from noon to 6:30, the route only runs away from Chicago. By far the weirdest part of this route, however, is the last outbound trip. The last run, which leaves Union Station at 7:30 p.m., only goes express to Bolingbrook, and then, on request only, stops at any metro station on the Heritage Quarter line except Summit and Willow Springs. The Heritage Quarter is a metro line that only runs 3 trips per day during rush hour in peak direction. My guess is that while a good amount of demand existed for that service a little bit after rush hour, Metro either couldn't or wouldn't run an extra train, so PACE had to supplement it. Before I get to number 1, I'm going to talk about a couple very weird discontinued routes that would likely be in the top 2 or 3 if they still existed today. First are actually a group of routes that are similar enough to be considered as one. These routes are the Shuttlebugs, particularly the Lake Cook Shuttlebugs. The Lake Cook Shuttlebugs ran rush hours only from the Lake Cook and Braeside metro stations to various locations along Lake Cook Road. They included routes 627, 628, 629, 631, 632, 633, 634, 635, and 640. PACE doesn't really do anything else like this, with a bunch of routes on the same street that diverge slightly to serve different destinations just off the main street. Though, if you include the 626, the total daily ridership of all the routes was over 1,000, which is pretty impressive for a rush hour only quarter in the suburbs. But either way, due to COVID, service on all the Shuttlebugs was suspended and was never brought back. Now, the service they provided is pretty much supplemented by the 626, 213, and 471. You might be wondering why PACE would use the word bug to describe one of their services, and well, frankly, I don't know. It's very weird and I just don't know why they did it. Next is Route 809. The 809, which ran rush hours only, started at the Fox Lake Metro Station and ran north straight up along Highway 12 until Richmond, Illinois, where it terminated. If you're familiar with McHenry County, you'll know that this route goes through mostly proper rural areas, with forests and cornfields and so forth. Now, while PACE does operate services through rural areas, they'll always have some sort of specific reason to do so, most often to connect 2 relatively large towns or to serve some sort of industrial facility. The 809 was the only exception to this. The route just went off into rural Illinois without serving any major destinations. The route was instituted in 2015 and discontinued in 2019 due to low ridership. And when I say low ridership, I mean low. The route got an average daily boarding count of, wait for it, 1. 1 person per day. I'm honestly surprised they kept the route for as long as they did. PACE tends to cut commuter shuttle routes if they get consistently below 20 rides per day, much less 1. But the route was contracted by McHenry County, so it's possible they were just less willing to eliminate the route. Now route number 1, the weirdest route in Pace's network, is the 905 Schaumburg Trolley. There are a lot of things to say about this route. First of all, it uses buses that actually kind of look like trolleys, and that's how the route is identified. It doesn't show a number, it just says Schaumburg Trolley. Even though it doesn't say 905, I guarantee you it is the 905. Anyways, the route starts at the Northwest Transportation Center and heads through the center of Schaumburg to the Schaumburg Convention Center Hotel, wiggling around a number of major destinations including Woodfield Mall, the Hyatt Regency, Roosevelt University, and IKEA. Southbound buses head back on a slightly different routing, stopping at the same places but in a slightly different order. The route only runs on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, except for summer and the winter holidays between Thanksgiving and New Year's, where it runs every day. The route runs from late morning to about 8:30 p.m. or 5:30 p.m. on Sundays. This route obviously exists to serve shoppers going around Schaumburg, but it's also clearly weird. It is probably the most circuitous route in the Pace system, which is saying a lot. The schedule is also certainly one of a kind. And not to mention, the buses themselves look like trolleys, which is something Pace has not done anywhere else.